My name is Richard Warren, and I'm 57 years old. I come from a quiet little town just outside Dallas, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else's business before the sun even rises, and news travels faster than the morning breeze. I've lived most of my life believing I understood the rules of this world, that if you worked hard, minded your manners, and treated people fair, life would return that respect in one way or another. But I learned, painfully, that life doesn't always play by the rules you think it does. Sometimes it throws a curveball so sharp, so unexpected, it knocks the wind right out of your lungs and leaves you staring at the pieces of a life you thought was safe. My story begins on the day that should have been one of the proudest, happiest days of my entire existence, my son's wedding day, but instead became the day everything inside me cracked open. I remember standing there in that grand decorated hall, the warm glow of candlelight shimmering across the walls, white roses lining the aisle like soft clouds, and people dressed in their finest clothes buzzing with excitement. Weddings do that to folks. They turn even the most serious faces into smiles and fill the air with hope. And in the middle of all that light and joy stood my boy, Ethan, my pride, my flesh, my favorite piece of this world. He looked handsome in a way I'd never seen him look before, like he'd grown 10 years in one morning. There was this spark in his eyes, a glow you can't fake or rehearse. It's the kind of glow a man only gets when he truly believes he's stepping into the future he always hoped for. Seeing him like that opened up something deep inside me. It took me back to when he was a little kid, running around the yard with his shoelaces untied, calling for me to watch him as he climbed the old oak tree. I raised him alone after his mother passed 8 long years of trying to be both mother and father, of learning how to braid hair for school photos, how to patch up scraped knees, how to show up even on days when loneliness pressed on me like 100-pound weight. But the kid, he kept me alive. He kept me going. And standing there watching him prepare to start his own family, I felt this surge of pride that nearly brought tears to my eyes. But that moment, that precious, fragile moment, didn't last, because while the world saw a beautiful wedding filled with joy and hope, what I didn't know then was that underneath the surface, just beneath the polished smiles and practiced politeness, something dark was festering. Something old, something hidden, something that had been waiting for years to explode. And it exploded the moment she stood up. I didn't notice her at first. I was too focused on Ethan, too wrapped up in the joy on his face. But then her chair scraped across the polished wooden floor a sharp, dragging sound that sliced through the music and chatter like a blade. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. Even the priest paused mid-sentence. And there she was, Lydia, the groom's mother, or rather, my son's fiancée as mother. I had always thought she was one of those upper-class women who carried themselves like they were made of glass smooth, perfect, impossible to read. She had this elegance about her, like she was always posing for a magazine. Her hair perfectly styled, her clothes crisp, her smile thin and polite, in that way rich folks have when they're pretending they're above the rest of us. She held a champagne glass in her hand, shaking just slightly, not enough for most people to notice, but I noticed. Her eyes weren't on her daughter. They weren't on the groom. They were locked on me, and there was something in her gaze, something I couldn't name at the time. Fear, guilt, dread, whatever it was, it sent a chill across the back of my neck. She cleared her throat, and the whole room leaned in just a little. I remember thinking she was going to give one of those dramatic wedding speeches fancy folks love to give. You know the type, long stories about childhood memories, heartfelt blessings, maybe a tear or two for extra flair. But the words she spoke next were not blessings. They were not memories. They were not even words a sane person would choose to speak at a wedding. They were words that burned the entire event to the ground. "I have something to confess," she said. Her voice trembled ever so slightly, but her eyes never left mine. "Something I should have said years ago. Something that changes everything." The room went dead silent. My heart thudded in my chest. I wanted to say something, maybe, "Hey, now's not the time," or "Sit back down. You're ruining the moment," but my throat felt tight, like someone had reached in and squeezed it. I could feel people looking at me even before she continued speaking. It was like the air itself shifted, heavy and suffocating. And that's when something inside me whispered, "Richard, something's wrong. Something big. Something you don't see yet." And I should have seen it. I should have noticed the tension in her eyes during the planning meetings. I should have noticed the way she always avoided being alone with me. I should have questioned the strange look she gave me, like she recognized something in my face she was scared to confront. I should have picked up on the cracked voice she tried to hide at the rehearsal dinner. I should have paid more attention to the nervous hand-wringing, the quiet glances toward her husband, the discomfort she couldn't mask whenever Ethan hugged me. But I didn't. I was too proud, too trusting, too busy trying to make sure my son had the perfect day he deserved. Too busy believing people were better than the secrets they kept. Now I know better, because what happened next, her confession, her truth, or what she claimed was the truth, didn't just ruin a wedding. It didn't just hurt my son. It ripped open a past I didn't even know I had. It dragged me back decades to a time I barely remembered. It rewrote history, twisted relationships, shattered identities, and left two families standing in the ashes of one woman's long-kept secret. Before that moment, I thought I understood betrayal. I thought betrayal was something simple, someone lying to your face, someone breaking a promise, someone turning their back on you when you needed them. But betrayal, real betrayal, isn't loud or obvious. It hides in silence. It hides in the spaces between words. It hides in smiles that don't reach the eyes. It hides in secrets buried so deep they only come up when the world is burning. And what happened that day? That was betrayal in its purest, coldest form. But the thing about betrayal is that it doesn't end with the blow. No betrayal is just the spark. The explosion comes later. The fire spreads afterward. The damage shows itself in waves. And the revenge, the justice you find, comes only when you sift through the ruins and decide you're not going to let the people who hurt you walk away clean. I didn't walk away from that wedding the same man I walked in as, and I sure as hell didn't stay quiet. Not after what she accused me of. Not after what she claimed I had done. Not after what she stole from my son. But I can't start there to understand what truly happened at that wedding, that moment when one woman stood up and shattered everything. You have to go back with me. You have to walk through my past, through the mistakes I didn't know I was making, through the blind spots that cost my family so much. You have to see the secret that tied our families together, long before my son ever met the woman he thought he'd spend his life with. A secret buried so deep, so carefully manipulated, that I didn't stand a chance of seeing it coming. This is the story I never wanted to tell, but it's time, because everything that followed, the chaos, the accusations, the broken hearts, the revenge, started right there in that moment, in that silence, in that confession, and nothing, absolutely nothing, was ever the same again. Before all hell broke loose at my son's wedding, and before the truth tore through my life like a saw blade hitting a hidden nail, I actually believed things were stable. Not perfect, not glamorous, not loud, but steady, predictable. A life that moved at the quiet pace of early mornings, fresh coffee and sawdust settling on my shirt. I was 57, the kind of age where a man starts to feel the weight of all the years he's lived, but also the strange lightness of understanding what truly matters. I wasn't rich. I wasn't famous. But I was comfortable enough, semi-retired from the carpentry business I had built almost entirely by hand, and known around town as the guy you called when a door jammed, a porch sagged, or a kitchen table needed to be brought back from the dead. I could fix nearly anything made of wood except, as I would later learn, the pieces of trust someone else had destroyed behind my back. Life looked calm on the outside, but inside, I was a man who had already survived one storm, losing my wife, Mary Ann. 8 years had passed since the day I watched her take her last breath. Yet somehow the memory was still sharp enough to cut. She had been my partner in everything, my best friend, my anchor, the woman whose laugh could pull me out of my darkest moods. When she died, it felt like part of my chest went with her. And for a while, I walked around hollow, like someone had scooped out the center of me. But grief has a strange way of reshaping a person. You don't get over it. You learn to carry it. And the only reason I kept moving, the only reason I didn't just collapse into the emptiness she left behind, was our son Ethan. Raising Ethan alone wasn't easy. But it was the one responsibility I never complained about. I changed from a man who built houses to a man who built stability. I learned how to braid hair when he was little because Mary Ann used to do it for him before school plays. I learned how to cook meals that didn't come out of a box. I showed up to parent-teacher meetings, sometimes tired, sometimes stressed, but always proud to sit in a tiny plastic chair and hear how well he was doing. I taught him the things I believed mattered most. Treat people with kindness. Keep your promises. Do the right thing even when it's hard. And remember that a man's character is measured by how he acts when nobody's watching. And he actually listened. That boy grew into a young man who made me proud in ways I can't even put into proper words. So when he introduced me to his girlfriend, Eliza, I immediately noticed something different in him. It wasn't just happiness, though he had plenty of that. It was something deeper. Hope, a spark I hadn't seen in him since before his mother passed away. Eliza was polite, soft-spoken, smart, with a smile that stretched across a whole room. She was the kind of girl who'd come over for dinner and reach for the dish soap before I even finished eating. She had this gentle presence that made the house feel warm again, like she opened a door to something good after years of walking through shadows. Her family, though, that was another story entirely. From the first moment I met her mother, Lydia, I sensed something off. She was elegant in the way rich people are elegant: smooth hair, perfect nails, expensive perfume, and a kind of smile that felt rehearsed. She talked with a polished sharpness, the kind that could slice someone open while sounding sweet as sugar. And she wasn't shy about making little comments. Nothing loud or direct, but small, cutting remarks wrapped in politeness. Her husband, man she introduced simply as Charles, stood beside her like he didn't belong in his own skin, quiet, hesitant, distant. There was something about him that made me feel like he was. always thinking about leaving, but never figured out how dud. Still, I didn't judge them. Life teaches you not to, especially when you've been broken enough times yourself. When the wedding planning started, though, something shifted. Suddenly Lydia wasn't just involved, she was controlling every second of it. The venue, the flowers, the decorations, the seating chart, the menu, the colors, the ceremony. She took over like the wedding belonged to her, not her daughter. She had opinions about the cake, the music, the lighting, even the order of toasts. I tried to laugh it off at first, chalking it up to her being one of those big personality types who treat weddings like Broadway productions. But the more she inserted herself, the more uneasy I felt, even if I couldn't explain why. And then there were the looks, these strange, subtle glances she kept throwing my way. Not the snooty, kind, rich folks give working-class people. No, these were different. More nervous. Sometimes she'd study my face like she was trying to recognize something in me. Other times, she'd look away so fast it felt like she was afraid I'd catch whatever secret sat behind her eyes. Once, I walked into a room and heard her whispering with her husband, voices low, urgent, like they were arguing. They stopped the second they noticed me. She smoothed her hair, forced that polite smile again, and acted like nothing happened. I should have paid more attention. I should have asked questions. I should have followed that uneasy feeling in my gut. But I didn't, because at the time, all I cared about was my son being happy. He was marrying the girl he loved. He was building the life he deserved, and I didn't want to cast a shadow over any of it. But here's the cruel thing about life. Sometimes the truth is hiding in plain sight, and sometimes the person keeping the secret is standing close enough to touch. Lydia's nervous glances weren't nerves at all. They were guilt, recognition, fear. She knew something I didn't, something I never would have guessed. Something that tied her to me in a way that should never have existed. A secret that, if revealed, would have stopped that wedding before a single rose petal touched the aisle. But I didn't know, so life kept moving forward, quiet and steady on the surface, while the countdown to disaster ticked beneath it, silent, merciless, waiting for the moment everything would explode. 2 weeks before the wedding, 2 short, ordinary-looking weeks, something happened that should have stopped me cold. Something small, something quiet, something easy to overlook. But the kind of moment that, once the truth comes out, replays in your head over and over until you're sick with regret for not paying attention. It happened at the rehearsal dinner, the night when everyone was supposed to be relaxed, joyful, soaking in the glow of the upcoming celebration. The catering staff was setting out trays of appetizers, the DJ was testing out music in the corner, and people buzzed around with wine glasses in hand, laughing like nothing bad could ever touch them. Ethan was glowing with that big, open kind of happiness he rarely showed, and Eliza looked like she had swallowed a star. But under all that laughter, underneath the clinking glasses and chatter, something else was happening, something raw and out of place. I heard crying, not the soft kind where someone tries to hide their emotions. No, this was heavy, broken, sobbing, the kind that punches through walls. At first, I thought maybe it was one of the bridesmaids who'd had a little too much champagne, or an overwhelmed relative who couldn't handle the pressure. Weddings do that to people, but the sound had this depth to it, a desperation that grabbed me by the spine and pulled me toward it. I followed it down one of the back hallways of the event hall, away from the laughter, away from the music, where the lights were dimmer and the world felt strangely quiet. And there she was, Lydia, the groom's mother. The woman who always carried herself like nothing and no one could ever shake her. She was standing near a supply closet, leaning against the wall like she needed it to keep upright. Her makeup was smeared down her cheeks, her mascara clumped into messy streaks. Her hands were trembling so hard she could barely wipe her face, and her breathing. It was sharp, uneven, almost like she was gasping for air between sobs. I'd seen grief. I'd lived grief, but what I saw on her face wasn't just sadness. It was fear. Pure, unfiltered fear. I approached slowly, trying not to startle her. "Ma'am, you all right?" The moment my voice hit her ears, she flinched like she'd been struck. Her head snapped up, eyes wide, shiny with tears that didn't match the polished, controlled woman she usually showed everyone. For a second, she looked like a child caught in something terrible, like she expected punishment or judgment. "Didn't see you," she rushed, turning away, trying to dab at her face with her fingers. "Just allergies. Allergies." I'd heard a lot of lies in my lifetime, but that one barely had legs to stand on. Allergies don't make your shoulders shake. They don't make your voice crack. They don't leave you looking like someone punched a hole straight through your chest. But I didn't call her out on it. I wasn't raised that way. Instead, I stepped closer and spoke gently, trying to reassure her. "Look, if you need help with anything, I'm here. We're family now." That word family hit her like a physical blow. I saw it. She swallowed hard, her throat moving like she had something lodged inside it. Her eyes darted away from mine, her jaw tightening. And then she whispered something so soft, I almost wondered if the walls were playing tricks on me. "You don't understand. None of this should be happening." The words were cracked, fragile, heavy with something I couldn't name. It felt like she was confessing, like she wanted to tell me something she'd been carrying for decades, something she couldn't bear alone anymore. My heart thudded, uneasy. I asked her, "What do you mean?" And just like that snap, she was someone else again. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, smeared the last of her tears away with her palm, and forced her expression back into its usual cold, perfect calm. The switch was so fast, it made me wonder if I'd imagined everything. "Nothing," she said, voice suddenly steady. "Just stress. Let's get back out there." She didn't wait for my response. She brushed past me, walked down that hallway with her spine stiff and her steps too quick, like she needed to escape before her mass cracked again. I stood there for a few seconds, the dim hallway humming faintly with the echo of her sobs. And something inside me whispered that this wasn't normal, that something was deeply, dangerously off. But I'd never been the kind of man to meddle in other people's private pain. I respected boundaries even, when maybe I shouldn't have, that night. Back at home, I sat on my couch and replayed that moment again and again. Lydia crying wasn't weird by itself. Weddings stir up emotions. But the way she cried, that was different. It was like she was terrified. Like she knew something the rest of us didn't. Something about the wedding. Something about me. Something about Ethan. Something she was trying desperately to hold together. Like she was the only person standing between a secret and a catastrophe. I tried bringing it up to Ethan the next morning while we ate breakfast. "Son, your future mother-in-law was crying last night. Looked bad. Real bad. You sure everything's okay?" He barely looked up from his food. "Dad, she's dramatic. She's always like that. She cries at commercials. Trust me, it's nothing." I wanted to push further, I wanted to tell him this wasn't the kind of crying people do over commercials or wedding stress. But he was so confident, so calm, so sure that everything was fine. And I trusted him. Maybe too much. Maybe because I didn't want to be the one to plant seeds of doubt right before his wedding. Maybe because he deserved peace. Maybe because I was blind to the storm sitting right in front of us. Meanwhile, Lydia wasn't being dramatic. She wasn't overwhelmed. She wasn't emotional. She was breaking, cracking, holding back a truth that was about to tear our families apart. A truth she had buried so deep she thought it would never surface, and yet it was already crawling its way into the light, whether she liked it or not, because what she was hiding wasn't just troubling, wasn't just painful, it was catastrophic. A week before the weddings, 7 days before everything exploded, I walked out to my mailbox the same way I had every morning for years. It was early, the Texas sun just stretching itself across the sky, the air warm with that familiar dusty smell our town gets before noon. I wasn't expecting anything unusual. Bills, coupons, maybe a letter from an old customer asking if I still did custom furniture. Just the usual rhythm of life. But sitting there in the metal tray, all by itself, was an envelope that didn't belong. It was plain, white, thin, no stamps except the basic postage, no return address, no company logo, no name written on the front, just my address scrawled in shaky handwriting. The kind of shaky that comes from fear or urgency, not old age. I frowned as I picked it up. The paper felt too light to be anything important, but something about it made the hairs on my arms rise. I opened it right there by the mailbox, tearing the flap slowly, almost cautiously, like part of me already sensed this wasn't ordinary. Inside was just one thing, a photograph. No note, no explanation. Just a single old photo. The moment my eyes hit it, my stomach tightened, not just turned, but twisted like someone was wringing it from the inside. I knew the setting instantly. A company Christmas party. Must have been 35 years ago, back when I was in my early 20s, working construction for a large corporate builder, back when Marianne was alive, back when life was simple and I still believed the world kept its promises. In the photo, a younger version of me was standing near one of those fake Christmas trees companies like to put up. I was holding a plastic cup, smiling that goofy, carefree smile I haven't worn in decades. But it wasn't me that shook me. It was the woman next to me. She looked young, bright eyes, sharp jaw, hair curled just right like she came out of some 80s commercial. And she wasn't just standing near me, she was leaning toward me, close enough that our shoulders touched, close enough that anyone looking at the photo might assume something more was going on. And her face, Lord, her face looked exactly like a younger Lydia. Not similar, not kind of like her. No, it was her. I held the photograph in my hand, feeling the edges cut lightly into my fingers. I kept staring at it, my heart beating slow but heavy. I had to dig deep into old memories, dusty ones I hadn't touched in years. I remembered the company Christmas party. I remembered the loud music, the two-tart punch, the cheap decorations. And I remembered a young intern from corporate, smart girl, quiet, always watching people. She helped with scheduling and paperwork, so she was around sometimes when our crews checked in. But I had no memory, none of ever being close to her. Certainly not close enough to take a picture like this. And if I ever had taken a picture with her, I should have remembered it. I wasn't the type of man to forget something like that. Not back then, not now. Yet, there it was. A photo that said otherwise. I turned it over, hoping maybe a date or a name would be written on the back. Nothing, except a faded Photolab stamp. So old, the ink looked like it had been washed through 1,000 cycles of time. I didn't like it. Not one bit. Who sent this? Why now? Why before the wedding? I kept staring at the woman Lydia, younger, softer, but unmistakably her. The resemblance wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be. And the way she leaned toward me, too familiar, too comfortable, too intimate. It made my chest feel tight, like someone was pressing a weight straight against my ribs. I tried calling the number printed at the bottom of the Photolab stamp. Maybe someone kept records. Maybe this was nothing more than some mistaken print that found its way to me. But when I dialed it, the automated voice answered coldly. This number has been disconnected. Disconnected for years. Probably just another dead end, just another thread leading nowhere, or maybe leading exactly where someone wanted me to look, because someone, whoever sent that, enveloped didn't want to stay anonymous by accident. They wanted me to see this picture, wanted me confused, wanted me unsettled, wanted to loosen something inside me, like a screw slowly turning until the whole machine rattles apart. I sat at my kitchen table with that photo for almost an hour, turning it, examining it, studying every corner like it held some hidden clue I was too dense to see. Every time my eyes drifted to the younger Lydia, something deep inside me shifted. A memory that wasn't clear, but familiar in that uncomfortable way when your brain recognizes a face faster than your heart wants it to. Why did her smile in that photo look like a secret? Why did her eyes look like she knew something I didn't? Why did the whole moment feel wrong? By nighttime, I found myself lying awake in the dark, the photo on the nightstand beside me. The more I thought, the more uneasy I became, because earlier that week, I had caught her crying alone in that hallway. And now this photo resurfacing after 35 years, right before our kids were supposed to be joined as one family. And it hit me then, quiet but heavy. What if Lydia wasn't crying because she was emotional? What if she was terrified this photo, or whatever it represented, would surface? What if someone else besides me got one? What if she was hiding something that was about to collide with the wedding? My brain kept spiraling, replaying that whisper she gave me at the rehearsal dinner. You don't understand. None of this should be happening. At the time, I had brushed it off as stress, but now it sounded like a confession, a warning, maybe even a plea. The worst part was, I didn't have proof of anything, just a photo I couldn't explain, a woman who cried like she was falling apart, and a gut instinct that told me something old, something buried, was clawing its way back into the present. And the truth about old secrets, they never stay dead. Not really, this photo, this single image from decades ago. It wasn't just a memory someone threw back at me. It was the first crack in the dam I had been standing under without knowing it. And once cracks appear, water always finds its way out. And when it does, it doesn't trickle, it floods. The morning of the wedding felt too good to be real, like the world had wrapped itself in soft light and calm winds just to bless my son's big day. I woke up before the alarm, before the sun even fully pushed through the blinds. There was this quiet in the air, the kind of peaceful silence that hugs you for a moment before the day starts. I stood by the window with my coffee, watching the sky glow orange, and I felt happy, deeply, calmly happy. Like after everything life had taken from me, the long nights raising Ethan alone, the grief of losing Marianne, the years of trying to give my boy a stable life, it all made sense now. It all led to this moment. That feeling didn't last. By 10 o'clock, I was arriving at the venue, a beautifully decorated hall on the edge of town. The place looked magical, almost unreal. Cream-colored roses lined the entrance, soft and fresh, like they'd been hand-picked at dawn. Golden drapes hung from the ceiling, catching the sunlight and throwing warm reflections across the room. Fairy lights twinkled like tiny stars overhead, giving everything a dreamy glow. Guests were filling the space, greeting one another with proud smiles and excited chatters. Photographers buzzed around, capturing the bride's dress, the flower arrangements, the guests' laughter. Kids in miniature suits and fluffy dresses ran around chasing each other, their parents trying to wrangle them with half-hearted threats and full-hearted smiles. Everything felt warm, inviting, perfect for a while. I allowed myself to simply enjoy the moment, to breathe, to watch the life around me move with joy and expectation. I took a slow walk around the venue, shaking hands with relatives, nodding at old friends, joking with Ethan's childhood buddies. Every face around me radiated excitement. Then Ethan walked in. My son, my only child, looked like he had been carved out of happiness itself. He wore a deep navy tuxedo that made him look older, more confident. His hair was neatly styled, and there was this brightness in his eyes, the kind of joy you can't fake. He spotted me across the room and came over with a grin so wide it softened every line in his face. Dad, he breathed, pulling me into a hug. Thanks for everything. Couldn't have made it here without you. It hit me hard. Not the words he'd thanked me before, but the sincerity in his voice. The way his arms wrapped around me like he meant it. Like he understood every sacrifice I'd made. Every night I went without sleep so he wouldn't have to feel alone. My throat tightened, and I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes. That's what dads do, I murmured, patting his back. I'm proud of you, son. He pulled back with that beaming, almost boyish smile. I can't wait for you to see the vows. They're gonna make you cry. I laughed, pretending I had any defense left in me. I'm way ahead of you. For a second, just 1 second, Does believe nothing could go wrong. That this day would be exactly what it looked like. Beautiful, peaceful, full of hope. Then my eyes drifted across the room and landed on Lydia Dot standing near the stage, looking nothing like the polished, confident woman she usually pretended to be. She looked broken, her skin was pale, almost grey. Her lips trembled when she tried to keep them in a straight line. She clutched a champagne glass so tightly her knuckles were white. And her eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes, weren't scanning the room like usual. They were locked on Ethan, not with pride, not with joy, not even with motherly affection, with guilt, raw, trembling guilt, like she was looking at someone she'd wronged. Someone she wished she could protect but couldn't. Someone who didn't deserve what was coming. A cold, uneasy feeling slithered through my chest. I watched her for a moment longer, noticing how she kept dabbing her forehead with a napkin, how her breathing came too fast, how her shoulders kept twitching like she was fighting off a panic attack. Then she looked up and caught me staring, and I swear her face cracked. Not physically, not literally, but emotionally, spiritually. Something inside her shattered. Her eyes widened just a little, and there was this flick of fear, shame, recognition. Something I couldn't name, but it crawled straight into my gut. I took a few slow steps toward her, thinking maybe she was sick, maybe she needed help, maybe I was reading too much into things. But the moment she realized I was moving in her direction, she turned away sharply, almost stumbling as she walked to the front row. Not away from the ceremony. She sat down, staring at her shaking hands, breathing shallowly like she was trying to rehearse something in her mind. The ceremony began. Soft music played. Guests settled into their seats. The bridesmaids walked down the aisle, smiling so perfectly you'd think they were trained for it. The flower girl tossed petals with all the seriousness of a tiny general. Then Elisa entered, beautiful, glowing, her white dress shimmering like sunlight on water. People gasped. Cameras flashed. Ethan's face lit up like Christmas morning. For a moment, everything felt right again, but not for Lydia. She didn't smile, didn't clap, didn't even blink. She kept staring at Ethan as though she was memorizing his face. His smile, his innocence, like she was afraid she'd never see that expression on him again. The priest began speaking, his voice calm and warm, guiding everyone through the ceremony. I tried focusing on the vows, the laughter, the soft emotional sniffles, but I kept glancing at Lydia, whose body was rigid, as though she were made of fragile glass, ready to crack under the slightest pressure. Then came the line, the moment that changed everything. The priest said gently, "If anyone has anything to say before these two are joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace." Usually, that moment passes in silence, a formality, a tradition, just words, but not today. Today, a chair screeched across the floor like someone dragging metal against stone, a sound sharp enough to slice through the entire hall. Lydia stood up, her hand trembled so violently the champagne glass rattled, reflecting the fairy lights in a chaotic shimmer. A hush fell over the room instantly. Whispers rose. People leaned forward. Some gasped softly. Others exchanged confused glances. Ethan froze halfway between a smile and a frown. Eliza blinked in confusion, clutching her bouquet a little tighter. The priest looked startled, unsure whether to speak or wait me. I felt dread crawl up my spine like ice water sliding under my skin. I locked eyes with Lydianne for the first time since I'd met her. She couldn't look away, not even for a second. Her face was streaked with fear, shame, panic, and something that looked terrifyingly close to resignation. Finally, she lifted her chin, her voice shaking as she said, "I have something to confess." You could feel the air leave the room. She swallowed hard. Something I should have said years ago. Every heartbeat in the hall seemed to stop. Her voice cracked, something that changes everything. Those words, those quiet, broken words were the first hammer to strike the life I knew. And the moment she said them, I felt it. Nothing, absolutely nothing, was ever going to be the same again. You ever feel the ground tilt under your feet even though you haven't taken a single step? It's a strange sensation, like the universe nudged you, whispering that your life is about to split clean in half. That's what happened to me in that moment. I wasn't moving, but everything around me was. The air grew heavy, pressing on my lungs as though the world itself wanted to squeeze the truth out of me before I even knew what that truth was. There we all were, standing in the middle of what was supposed to be the happiest day of my son's life. Bridesmaids holding their flowers so tight the petals were bruising. Groomsmen shifting awkwardly in stiff suits. Guests holding their breath like a room full of statues pretending to be human. And in the middle of it all, Lydia, hands shaking, mascara smudged, breathing like someone trapped underwater. Too long. She wasn't just nervous. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was terrified. And not the kind of terrified you get before a speech or a mistake. This was bone-deep, soul-rotting terror, the kind that comes from a secret that has been festering for decades and is finally clawing its way out. She stared at me, not at her daughter, not at the priest, not at her husband who was sitting stiff as a wooden chair. She looked straight at me with a desperation I didn't understand, like she was silently begging for something, mercy, maybe forgiveness, or maybe she was hoping I already knew what she was about to confess, so she wouldn't have to be the one to say it. But I didn't know. I had no idea what was coming. She swallowed hard. Her throat bobbed like each word she forced out was scraping her raw, and then she said it. 35 years ago, I had an affair. The entire hall inhaled at once. A collective gasp, sharp as broken glass. Even the fairy lights seemed to flicker at her words. That kind of silence after a confession like that didn't feel natural. It felt staged by fate itself. She paused, shaking, as though the next line weighed more than her whole body could carry. I never told anyone about it. Not my husband. Not my daughter. Not the man involved. No one. Whispers exploded instantly. Hushed voices. Shocked murmurs. People leaning into each other as if being closer would help them understand the storm swirling in front of them. But I just stood still. Frozen. Her eyes didn't leave me. And somewhere deep inside, something in my stomach twisted, not because I knew what she was about to say, but because she was looking at me like I should have known, like I had played a part in a story I didn't know I was in. Her lips trembled around the next sentence. That affair resulted in a child. The entire hall broke into noise, not the joyful kind, not wedding noise. This was the sound of panic, shock, fear, rage. Chairs scraped. Someone cried. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God," over and over. But I heard nothing except the pounding in my chest. A child. Her child? What did that have to do with this wedding? With my son? With my life? I couldn't make sense of any of it. She closed her eyes like she needed courage to finish what she'd started. And then she delivered the blow that broke everything. That child was Eliza, the bride, the girl standing on stage, the woman my son loved more than his own heartbeat. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes flooded instantly, overflowing with fear and disbelief. Her bouquet slipped out of her fingers and hit the floor. Petals scattered everywhere, the way their future was scattering right before our eyes. I should have felt something, anger, shock, pain, something, but I felt numb in a way that almost felt unreal. Like my mind had stepped out of my body and was watching from the outside. The hall was chaos now. People turning. People whispering, people staring at me because they all must have felt. The shift in the air, the unspoken connection, something ugly, something terrifying, something that didn't make any sense. Yet but was about to. My son looked at me, eyes wide, pleading for an answer I didn't have. "Dad, what does she mean?" His voice shook. "Dad, what is she saying? Dad?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My tongue felt heavy, my throat dry, my mind blank. I don't know, I finally managed. I don't understand, but Lydia raised her voice again. Louder this time, desperate, like she knew once the words left her mouth, there would be no undoing what came next. She pointed at me. The man I had that affair with was Richard Warren. My name exploded through that hall like a gunshot. Everything stopped. Every head turned. Every breath caught. Even the music playing faintly in the background seemed to choke and die. Me, she said me, my name, my life, my past, connected to her secret, like a chain wrapped around both of us. Time didn't just slow it, collapsed. I felt like the floor under me dissolved, like I was falling, except I wasn't moving. My vision blurred around the edges. My ears rang. Faces blended. Colors faded. The only thing sharp was her voice echoing in my skull. Eliza looked at me like the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. Her eyes filled with horror, not anger, not disgust, but disbelief that bordered on fear. Ethan stumbled backward like someone had shoved him, like the world had physically pushed him out of the moment he thought he was living in, because what Lydia had just said. It didn't destroy a wedding, it destroyed everything. In that instant, our two families weren't just tangled by marriage, they were tangled by blood. At least, that was her claim. A claim that turned lovers into siblings. A claim that turned joy into tragedy. A claim that turned me into the villain of a story I didn't even know I was in. As the room cracked open with screams, cries, and collapsing dreams, I was left standing in the middle of it all, wondering, how can a lie ruin everything if you don't even know whether it's a lie yet? But there was no time to think, no time to breathe, no time to understand, because the nightmare had only just begun. The moment Lydia's confession exploded through the hall, everything dissolved into pure chaos. It didn't feel like a wedding anymore. It didn't feel like a celebration. It felt like a crime scene, a battlefield, a place where dreams came to die. Security rushed in first, though none of us even knew what they were supposed to secure. People were shouting, grabbing their kids, pulling their partners toward the exits. Guests scattered like frightened birds, fleeing from a gunshot. Chairs toppled over. Glasses shattered on the floor. Somebody knocked over the cake table. And the massive white wedding cake, the one they spent thousands on Lind, slid and collapsed in a slow, tragic smear across the polished floorboards, as if symbolizing the way both families were collapsing right in front of each other. Ethan, my son, he fell apart in front of everyone. The man who had walked into that room with a smile wide enough to light a whole town was suddenly on his knees, like someone had cut the strings holding him together. His hands were gripping his hair, tears pouring down his face, his chest heaving like he couldn't breathe. He wasn't crying the way adults cry quietly, privately. He was crying like a child whose world got ripped open, loud, desperate, shaking. His heart wasn't just breaking, it was shattering. Eliza was no better. Her eyes were wild, almost glassy, as she stumbled backward. She didn't even seem to know where she was. She stared at her mother with a mixture of rage, betrayal, and hurt so deep it could have drowned her twice. When she found her voice, it wasn't a scream, it was a raw, gutted howl. "Mum, why? Why now? Why like this? What did you do?" Her words echoed off the walls. Lydia crumpled the moment she heard her daughter's voice. It was like the weight of 35 years hit her all at once. Her legs buckled, and she sank to the floor, hands covering her face, whispering something none of us could hear. Maybe it was regret. Maybe it was fear. Maybe she was praying for forgiveness she didn't deserve. Her husband, well, the man she had claimed was her husband for decades, just stood there looking like a ghost. Not angry, not sad, just hollow. Like someone had scooped out everything inside him and left the shell behind. I saw his eyes flicker toward me once, and what I saw there wasn't regret, was something worse. A silent accusation. A look that said, "You ruined my life," even though I didn't remember doing anything at all, and me. I was dragged into a storm I never asked for. A storm I didn't even see coming until it swallowed me whole. I must have repeated myself 100 times. I don't remember anything. I didn't. I don't know, but nobody wanted to hear it. Not that day. Not in that moment. The truth didn't matter. Logic didn't matter. Only the confession mattered. The photo mattered. The timing mattered. And all of it was pointing directly at me like a spotlight I never stood under voluntarily. Some guests looked at me with pity. Others with disgust. Others with a kind of morbid fascination. Like they were watching some TV drama unfold in real time. They were whispering, pointing, shaking their heads. I could feel their eyes crawling across my skin, judging me, blaming me, convicting me in a court of public opinion before I could even gather my thoughts. I felt small. I felt exposed. I felt like I had been thrust into the center of a tragedy that wasn't mine but was now mine, whether I liked it or not. That night, the town was buzzing. Small towns have big mouths, and news travels faster than truth. By the time I got home, the story had already mutated into 10 different versions. Some said I had knowingly abandoned Lydia 35 years ago. Some said I'd been a womanizer back then, and this was finally catching up to me. Some said Eliza and Ethan had been living in sin without knowing the truth, and that this was divine punishment. People love dramatic explanations more than the quiet truth. I learned that quickly, and for days, every time I stepped outside Evan for a carton of milk, I felt the whispers ripple behind me. People watching me over their shoulders. People turning away when I met their eyes. People judging, assuming, condemning. I wasn't just Richard anymore. I was that man. The man who ruined a wedding. The man who fathered the bride. The man who didn't even know his own child. The man whose son almost married his own sister. It didn't matter that none of it was confirmed. A scandal doesn't need truth to grow legs. A rumor doesn't need proof to take flight. Ethan couldn't even look at me for the first 2 days. Every time he tried, his face crumpled. He would open his mouth like he wanted to say something, but no words came out. He would just shake his head, walk away, and shut himself in his room. I could hear him crying at night. Not loudly, but enough. Enough for a father to know his son was carrying a weight he should have never had to carry. Eliza, on the other hand, disappeared completely. She locked herself in her room at her parents' house. She didn't show up for work, didn't talk to anyone. The curtains stayed closed. The lights stayed off. Her voice didn't leave that room. It was like she was dissolving inside her own grief, suffocating in it. I heard from someone that she had torn her wedding dress apart in a fit of hysteria. Shreds of white fabric thrown everywhere like snow. 2 families destroyed in one confession. 2 homes filled with silence, tears, and unanswered questions two young lives caught in a nightmare they never deserved. But here's the strange thing about lies. They're never smooth, never perfect. Lies are clumsy. Lies are messy. Lies always come with loose threads hanging at the edges. And loose threads have a funny way of pulling apart the entire fabric when someone tugs on them. And one loose end, one small detail, one thing that shouldn't have made sense, but did, ended up changing everything. Everything we thought we knew. Everything she said. Everything she destroyed. Because sometimes the loudest confession hides the quietest truth. Sometimes the thing someone screams to the world is meant to distract from the whisper they hope no one ever hears. And in the middle of all that destruction, I found that whisper, and when I did, the truth didn't just unravel the lie, it set the whole lie on fire. A week after the wedding disaster, the week that felt like a year, woke up to the sound of something sliding against my front door. When I opened it, there it was again. Another envelope. Same shaky handwriting. Same eerie silence around it. No return address. No hint of who sent it. No reason it should have been there except to pour more gasoline on an already burning life. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. My hands were trembling, though I didn't want to admit that to myself. I was scared. Not scared of danger, not scared of confrontation, scared of another truth I wasn't ready for. Inside was a DNA test report, Eliza's, and a note written on a scrap of yellow paper. The ink smudged as if the writer had rushed or didn't want to be recognized. The note said only 4 words. He's not the father. Under it, check who really is. Those words grabbed me by the throat. They didn't make sense. They didn't explain anything. They didn't comfort me or guide me. They just opened another door to another hallway full of shadows. I didn't know who he was referring to. Her husband, me, someone else. But the tone, the confidence felt like someone who knew something Lydia didn't want the world to know. My first instinct, fear my second. Hope, a dangerous combination. But hope has a strange way of slipping into your chest when you least expect it. I read the note 12 times. It didn't get clearer. It only grew heavier. But one thing was obvious: someone wanted me to keep digging. Someone wanted me to know the truth. Lydia didn't tell. Someone wanted her story to fall apart, so I did the only thing I could do quietly, without alerting anyone, not Ethan, not Eliza, not the town. I sent my DNA sample, packed it carefully, walked it to the post office myself, didn't say a word to the clerk, didn't even make eye contact. I felt like a fugitive mailing out evidence that could save or destroy lives. And then I waited 8 days, 8 long, suffocating, miserable days filled with doubt, guilt, anger, confusion. Every night I'd sit at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair across from me, the chair where my late wife used to sit. I kept imagining what she would say if she could see this mess. She would have put her hand on mine and said, "Richard, truth always finds its way." She believed in goodness, even when I did in single quotes. So while waiting for the test results, I started digging not into myself this time, but into Lydia's past. I called old co-workers from the company I'd worked at 35 years ago. Most of them were retired now. Some had moved away. Some didn't remember much. But others, others remembered plenty. Enough to paint a picture of the woman Lydia used to be the polished, elegant perfect woman who seemed to float above the rest of us. Turns out, she floated because she had help mostly from men with deep pockets. A few women I spoke to remembered her laughing in hallways with men too important to joke with interns. They remembered her slipping into offices with the blinds half closed. They remembered the way she always came back with new jewelry, expensive lunches, new privileges. I didn't want gossip. I wanted facts, so I tracked down an old friend named Benia, woman who had been close to Lydia back then. Took me 3 days to find her. She lived 2 towns over now, running a little thrift shop. She remembered everything. Too much. When I brought up Lydia's name, she stiffened. When I mentioned the wedding disaster, she put her hand over her mouth and whispered, "Oh Lord." She finally got caught, didn't she? Then she told me the truth Lydia hid. Back in those years, Lydia wasn't flirting with interns. She wasn't connecting with average guys. She had been involved with one man, in particular a man her husband feared, respected, and depended on her husband's boss. A man with money, power, and influence, a man used to getting what he wanted. A man who could shut down rumors with a single check. A man who kept her close, paid for her silence, and made sure nobody talked. Their affair wasn't one night. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't forgotten. It was deliberate, long-term, hidden under layers of privilege and manipulation. I felt disgust twist through my stomach, because suddenly everything Lydia said at the wedding looked different. It wasn't a breakdown. It wasn't a confession. It was a calculated story meant to protect herself from one truth she couldn't face. If her husband found out the truth that Eliza wasn't his daughter, she'd lose everything. The house, the money, the life she built on lies, the stability she worshipped. She didn't confess to save her daughter. She confessed to save herself, and she didn't even try. To soften the blow, she dropped the entire burden on my family, on my son, on me. But the real earthquake came the day the DNA results finally arrived. I held the envelope for a long time, felt its weight like it carried the fate of 4 lives inside it. My hands were sweating, my breath unsteady, my heart pounding in a slow, heavy rhythm. When I finally tore it open, my eyes scanned the results once, twice, 3 times, and the truth hit me so hard I had to sit down. Was not the father, not even close. 0%, no. Genetic match, no connection whatsoever. Every accusation, every look of disgust, every whisper, every doubt, every tear Ethan shed because of all of it, was based on a lie. I wasn't the father. I didn't ruin the wedding. I didn't create this nightmare. But someone did, because right there, printed clean as day, was the real match. The one biologically linked to Eliza. Her father was the same man who used to be her husband's boss. The powerful one, the wealthy one, the man who paid for silence, the man who controlled everything in that company 35 years ago. Her father, not the man she grew up calling dad, not me, not anyone else, the man Lydia protected at all costs. And suddenly, her confession made sense. She didn't reveal the truth. She redirected the truth. She weaponized the truth. She twisted it into something that created maximum destruction while keeping the real threat hidden. She wasn't afraid of me. She wasn't afraid of the wedding. She wasn't afraid of the past. She was afraid of Exposure, afraid that her real secret would surface, afraid her husband would find out the child he raised wasn't his, afraid the world she built on lies would collapse, so she sacrificed my son, sacrificed my reputation, sacrificed Eliza's sanity, sacrificed to young people's future, and she did it without blinking. That was the moment something inside me snapped, not rage, not hatred, but clarity. She wanted to ruin us, to save herself. I would ruin her to save my boy. I promised myself, right then and there, that I would expose her. I would bring every truth into the light. I would clear my name. I would give my son back the life she stole from him, and I would make her regret every tear she made him shed. My revenge wouldn't be loud, it wouldn't be violent, it wouldn't be reckless, it would be precise, calculated, icy, measured, devastating. I would pull every loose thread until her whole lie unraveled. In front of everyone she tried so hard to impress. I wasn't just going to prove my innocence, I was going to burn her mask to ash.
I didn't confront Lydia in a quiet room behind closed doors where she could twist the story again or cry her way out of guilt. I didn't call her, didn't threaten her, didn't even let her know that the truth had finally found a voice. No, people like her thrive in secrecy, in shadows, in the places where lies can breathe. So I decided to bring everything into the light. The kind of light that burns, the kind that exposes, the kind that melts masks straight off a person's face. I spent days preparing, not with anger boiling in my chest, but with a cold, sharpened clarity. I gathered documents, screenshots, the DNA report, testimonies from people who had known her years before, messages she thought had disappeared into the void. Every piece of evidence was organized, printed, and compiled into a presentation that no one in their right mind could deny. I rented the community hall, the biggest one in town. A place people associated with celebrations, fundraisers, charity dinners. I was about to turn it into the courtroom she had never imagined facing. Invitations went out. I didn't call it confrontation. I didn't call it a meeting of anger or vengeance. I labeled it a truth gathering. And the moment people received it, curiosity spread like wildfire. Everyone showed up. Relatives from both sides of the family, neighbors who had watched every rumor grow, community leaders who had known us for years, and even people who simply wanted to witness whatever spectacle was coming. I didn't blame them. When a lie this big explodes, the whole town feels the shock. Lydia walked in with the same confidence she had worn on the wedding day, as if she still believed she controlled the narrative. She smiled at people, shook hands, pretended humility like she was the victim of unfortunate circumstances. Her hair was styled, her dress perfect, her expression soft. She looked like a woman ready to accept someone's apology. She even came up to me, placed a hand on my arm, and whispered, "You made the right choice, calling everyone. It's time we fix the mess here." Confusion created. The audacity almost made me laugh. She thought she had won. She thought her lies had settled deep enough to grow roots. She didn't know I was about to rip them all out. I didn't argue with her. I simply stepped onto the small stage, grabbed the microphone, and let the murmurs die down as the projector lit up behind me. The first slide appeared, the DNA report, Eliza's sample, my sample, and the glaring, undeniable conclusion: I was not the father. A stillness fell over the room, not the kind that comes from peace, but the kind that comes right before a storm. Lydia's smile cracked just a little. Her fingers twitched. She adjusted her dress like she was trying to adjust reality itself. I spoke calmly, not dramatically, not angrily. I simply told the truth. I explained how I had been accused, how my entire reputation, my relationship with my son, my dignity as a man and father had been shattered with one confession at a sacred moment. I explained how I had stayed quiet, how I had allowed the whispers to wash over me because I believed truth didn't need noise, it just needed time. Then I clicked to the next slide. Photos, dates, locations, witness statements. Every piece of her past she desperately wished would remain buried. The same man kept appearing in every corner of her story, and I showed them exactly why. The wealthy boss, the man she had been involved with during the time she was married, the man who left traces in texts, in receipts, in memories from people who were no longer afraid to speak. I didn't exaggerate, didn't accuse. I simply put the truth on the screen and allowed everyone to see the puzzle assemble itself. When the final slide revealed the second DNA match, the one identifying the real father, gasps filled the hall like a wave crashing over rocks. Lydia's knees buckled. Her perfect posture collapsed. She stared at the screen as if it were a horror film she couldn't look away from. Her husband's face drained of blood, and without a word, without even looking at her again, he walked out of the hall. The doors slammed behind him with a finality that echoed through the entire room. Eliza collapsed where she stood, sobbing uncontrollably, betrayed by the woman who had raised her, lied to her, built her entire identity on secrets. Her cries weren't the cries of a daughter. They were the cries of someone who had just discovered her entire past was a fabrication. Her family members shook their heads at Lydia, some shouting, some crying, some simply backing away from her like she was a stranger. Because in that moment she was. Ethan stood in the corner, trembling. His face was wet with tears. He had spent days believing his father might be a monster. He had watched the woman he loved break. He had watched his future crumble. But now, as the truth unraveled, he looked at me as if seeing me again for the first time. He walked up to the stage in front of everyone, and before I could say anything, he wrapped his arms around me. His voice shook. "Dad, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I doubted you. I'm so sorry for everything." And in that embrace, all the pain of the past weeks lifted, just a little, enough for me to breathe again. Lydia tried to speak, but every word died in her throat. Her lies had no space left to hide. Her empire, carefully built on manipulation, appearance, and fear, cracked in one single night and collapsed under the weight of truth. Her perfect image shattered like thin glass. People she had controlled with charm and status turned away from her as if she carried a disease. She covered her face, shaking, finally tasting the consequences she had served to others for years. And me. I stood there with no rage left in me, no need to scream, no desire for violence. I didn't feel triumphant or cruel. I felt balanced, steady, whole again. Because revenge is often portrayed as fire and fury, but real revenge, the kind that truly cuts deep, comes quietly. It doesn't need shouting. It doesn't need threats. Sometimes it just needs truth. And that night, truth was louder than any lie she had ever told. The weeks that followed were not calm, not peaceful, not instantly healing. They were heavy, heavy with emotions that had been suffocated for too long, heavy with questions that didn't have answers yet, heavy with wounds that were still bleeding beneath the surface. The town had moved on from the spectacle, but the people who lived inside the destruction, the ones whose hearts had been fractured, were left to pick up the pieces one painful, trembling day at a time. Ethan barely slept for weeks. Eliza wandered through her days like someone trying to rebuild an identity from scattered memories. And I found myself breathing differently, moving differently, as if each step I took carried the weight of relief and exhaustion, truth and release. But life has a strange way of surprising you when you least expect it. It doesn't always choose grand moments. Sometimes healing begins quietly, softly, almost invisibly. One afternoon, months after the truth storm had ripped through all of us, I found Ethan sitting on the porch, staring at an unopened letter addressed to him in Eliza's handwriting. His hands trembled not with fear this time, but with something gentler, hesitation mixed with hope. He told me he hadn't spoken to her in weeks. She had gone away for therapy, trying to separate herself from her mother's shadow, trying to understand her life not as a product of lies, but as something she could finally shape for herself. He opened the letter slowly, like a man opening the door to a room he once cherished but had been too afraid to re-enter. I didn't read it, but I could see the shift in his eyes, that softening in his chest as he whispered, "She wants to talk, not as lovers, not as broken people, just as two humans trying to understand the mess they were thrown into." And that was the moment, the fragile beginning of something resurrecting itself. Their first meeting wasn't magical. It wasn't some romantic movie moment where everything fell back into place instantly. It was awkward, quiet, filled with silences and long breaths and eyes that had cried too much. They talked not about love, but about pain, how it felt to lose trust, how it felt to be manipulated, how it felt to carry shame for something they never caused. Slowly, over weeks, then months, something gentle began to rebuild itself between them, not driven by desperation or habit, but by understanding. Real understanding. The kind that grows only after truth scrapes you raw and forces you to heal from the inside out. Eliza learned she wasn't the sum of her mother's lies. Ethan learned forgiveness, not the kind that forgets, but the kind that frees. And as they rebuilt themselves individually, their connection found its way back, like two rivers that had been forced apart only to merge again naturally, in their own time, in their own way. A year after the day that nearly destroyed all of us, they stood together again. But this time, not in a hall filled with whispers and doubts and trembling betrayals. Their second wedding was small, intimate, tucked under a canopy of soft white lights behind our home. No grand decorations, no extravagant displays, just close friends, real family, and the kind of quiet joy that comes from surviving hell together and still choosing love. When they exchanged vows, their voices didn't tremble from fear, only from gratitude. Gratitude for truth, for healing, for the courage to start again. And Lydia, she wasn't invited. Not because of hatred, not out of revenge, but because the new story they were building had no space for the poison she carried. Some people are not meant to be in the chapters that follow. Some are meant to remain in the part of the book that teaches the hardest lessons. As for me, those months taught me something I didn't know I needed to learn. I discovered that a single lie can shatter even the strongest foundations, can destroy a day, a moment, a relationship, a life. But the truth has the power to destroy the liar, expose the rot, cleanse the air, and build a new beginning out of ashes. Integrity is a quiet thing, not flashy, not loud, often ignored. But when the storm comes, when the world doubts you, when shadows try to swallow your name, integrity stands like a lighthouse, steady, unmoving, guiding. I learned that standing by your truth, even when your knees tremble and your voice shakes, even when people turn their backs on you, even when you walk through days with accusations burning holes through your heart, if you hold the line long enough, truth finds its way home. It always does. It may take time. It may break you before it frees you, but it comes. And the first time I saw Ethan dance with his wife, his real, chosen, healed partner in life, beneath the soft lights of that small backyard ceremony, something inside me settled. Something deep, something peaceful. I watched them move together, slow and gentle, not as two people haunted by the past, but as two souls stepping into a future they finally understood belonged to them, not to the lies that once tried to control their fate. In that moment, I felt a peace so profound it didn't even feel like emotion anymore. It felt like truth itself wrapping around my chest. A peace you cannot buy. A peace no rumor can break. A peace built not on fantasy, but on honesty, growth, forgiveness, and the kind of family that survives the fire and learns to rise anyway. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt whole.